How many times have you heard the verse, Philippians 4:13? How many times have you heard it used correctly or incorrectly? How many times have you heard people try to correct it? Some people try to explain it away and say that it doesn't mean what it says, and some people try to go beyond and say it can just mean whatever I want it to mean. Today I want to simply give you my personal experience with that verse, what it did for me in my life, and how it worked out, and maybe my insight, my experience can help you in your life. This is the Fraught Life and Godliness podcast. I am your host, as always, Pastor Will, and today I want to simply go through, as I said, the ideas, the realities that turned up in my life through Philippians 4:13, as well as some other scriptures and principles in my life that led me from being somebody that was more or less ineffective, who was fearful, who too cautious, as I've said in other videos, and caused me to really grow up and start to take on tasks that were usually seen to me as too big or too complicated or too risky, and how it worked out in my life and how God gave me the strength to see past those kind of things and be successful in the things He had given me to do. We'll be right back after this. Okay, we've had quite a few technical difficulties while making this video. I've tried to record an intro to this several times. I deleted the main one that went into my main piece here. So I think I was saying that a lot of people, when it comes to Philippians 4:13, try to explain away this idea because they don't want to say or open, I guess, the Pandora's box of saying that when you believe this verse that you can pretty much do anything. Because the fear is, and what has been, is that people take it and say, well, I can do whatever I want. And then there are people who say, well, that's not what it means, and blah, 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 and they try and explain away, whatever. In my experience, and what I think I was saying, and what will lead into the part that was recorded, is that it's going to depend on whether or not you are living a life already that is following after Christ. That's like the prerequisite, and it really is the prerequisite to most of the promises in the Bible, so it shouldn't come as any surprise. But the prerequisite to Philippians 4:13 actually working in your life, to where I'm going to tell you through the next couple stories, as I say on here today, that you can do anything that God puts in your way, is the difference. The difference is, I should say, is between God putting it there and you putting it there. It's not that the verse can be used to kind of say that. It's not that the verse can be used to say, well, I can do anything I want to do. It's that when I'm walking with God, then He gives me the ability to do anything that has put into my path, because I know that He's put it there for me to do. Unless it's obviously something I should say no to, but that's elementary. Like, okay, yeah, I should know when it's not, I shouldn't do something. But there will be plenty of things that come into our life that look like we can't do them. But when God is in it, then we can. We don't not know how to do it at the time, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Because what it actually says is that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, or empowers me, or gives me strength, however you want to put that. Now, the context, if you don't know what context is, it is going to be the surrounding verses, the surrounding chapter, the surrounding book, the surrounding area of time it is in the Bible, wherever it is, chronologically, I guess. Even archaeological evidence as external context, historical context. There are a lot of layers to the idea of what surrounds a verse, what goes into it, what it's saying. There are certain things that are written in these things that may or may not be for certain people. And that's really what you're trying to figure out. Who is the author? Who is he speaking to? What culture is he speaking into? What problems are they dealing with? What is he trying to solve? And that's kind of what the questions are when you're looking at the context of something. And so obviously, if someone says that this verse means you can just do whatever you want because Christ is going to be with you, we understand that that's not what it's necessarily saying, because that goes against the entire context of the Bible. The Bible does not say that we can do whatever we want and God's just going to be with us in whatever we do. We understand that to be true from pretty much anywhere else. It's His glory, not ours. It's His will, not ours, and yada, yada. Even though we do have our own responsibilities as mankind, we are given responsibility. We are given free will. We're given ways to figure out how to accomplish God's will. I believe in freedom to do that within reason. But to just take this verse and paste it over stuff and say, well, I can do whatever I want because God's going to be with me, is obviously going to be false, fallacious, if that's the right word, I think. But the context is important. So let's look at the context. We're going to look at the surrounding verses here, at least the verses leading up to it. Right? So all the way back to verse 6, he's saying to this church, which is in the city of Philippi, which is a very poor church. That's another piece of context you need to know. They're a very poor church. They're struggling. They're having a problem. They want to give. They want to do more, but they can't. And obviously, they're struggling. They have pressures financially, culturally, just of the time where they're at. And so he tells them to be careful for nothing. Don't be anxious for anything in your life, is essentially what that word means. He says, but in everything, by prayer, supplication, and thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And he goes into, he says, a peace of God which passes all understanding shall keep or shall guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. So not only your feelings, but your thoughts, those will be guarded by Christ if we are allowing a life of prayerfulness and thanksgiving to kind of rule rather than anxiety, right? And then he goes into verse 8 and talks about your mindset. What should your thought life be? And so essentially, go back to verse 6. If you are anxious for everything and you're not praying like you ought to with thanksgiving, then look at verse 8. Compare your thought life with verse 8. And if it doesn't line up, then you know where you need to work. You need to think on things that are true, which is the Bible itself. It's a rock-solid foundation. I don't want to get into all of it, but in my own bouts with anxiety and depression, and the way I've found to manage those things, the key that came into my life that allowed me to have victory over that and manage it all this time since I was 19, and I was probably 20 something 9, so almost 10 years, I would say, that I just struggled with it and finally found a key. And the key was that I knew that no matter what I felt, the Word of God was true. And I found that to be kind of like the debris in the shipwreck that you cling on to when all hope is lost kind of thing. And I would hang on to that truth. And that's kind of what it says here. Whatsoever things are true, hold on to that. If you're facing anxiety, depression, those kind of things, you have to know that no matter what you feel, the Word of God is true. So when he says, this is for me, in Hebrews, when he says that, I'll never leave you nor forsake you, that's absolutely true. And no matter what I felt, no matter where I was in time or space, that was always going to be the case. And so I began to hold on to verses like that. And over time, I began to learn more and more, put them into practice, and just hold them regardless of how I felt. And I began to change who I was, which is what he's saying here. If you are anxious, focus on things that are true. Things that are honest, things that are just, pure, full of love, basically lovely, full of love, things of good report, good repute, good reputation. So maybe not something written down in the Bible, but something like, not every self-help book is complete trash. Some things people say they come across with experience, and so they're sharing those things. Some of those things are good. If they line up or they don't at least go against the Bible, maybe they're good. They have a good reputation. If there be any virtue or praise, think on those things. So he's saying if verse 6 is not true in your life, then put verse 8 to work and you'll begin to learn and you'll begin to grow. And then he says, those things which you've both learned, received, heard, and seen in me, do, and the God of peace shall be with you. And he says, I rejoice in the Lord greatly, verse 10, that at the last your care of me has flourished again, wherein you were also careful, but you lacked opportunity. And so he's saying here, you were passionate about wanting to help, but you didn't have the ability to do it because they were very poor and they didn't have a whole lot to give. Even though their hearts wanted to, they just couldn't do it. And he says, look, I'm not speaking of respect of want. I'm trying to give you guys a commendation. I'm not trying to manipulate you by sliding in that you didn't really help, even though you really wanted to. And he's not trying to gaslight them into helping him more. He said, I'm not speaking in respect of want, because I've learned, he says, in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. This is kind of parenthetical. Verse 10 stops, and then he begins to kind of speak in this parenthetical piece all the way down to verse 14. So verse 11 through 13 is a parenthetical piece where he's kind of explaining why he's not gaslighting them into trying to do more for him. He's not trying to be like, man, you guys really wanted to help, but you kind of didn't, And he's like, you guys need to tighten up. That's not what he's saying. And he's trying to explain that here. And so he says, I'm not speaking in respect of lack. And anytime, especially in the King James, if you ever read the word want, you can put in the word lack. Like in Psalms where it says that the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It's not about desire, it's about lack. In fact, I don't think anywhere in the Bible the word want, at least in the King James, nowhere in the King James does the word want mean desire. It usually uses lust or desire for desire. But the word want means lack. And so when it says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack, it means that you'll have the things that you need. Just like the verse in Proverbs, I think it is, that says, or maybe it's in Psalms 37 where it says that I've never seen the righteous forsaken or their children begging bread, because you'll have what you need. Proverbs speaks of that a lot. And so want means lack. I'm not speaking in respect of lack, but I've learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. And then he goes in and further explains what he means when he says he's content in whatever state. And it's like, what kind of states have you been in, Paul? Well, I know how to be abased or put down low, and I know how to abound or to be put up, or really to be poor and to be rich. Everywhere and in all things, I am instructed to be both full and to be hungry, to abound and to suffer need. And so he's saying, look, no matter what the situation is, if it's positive or it's negative, I've learned just to be content with it. And that kind of goes back to our podcast on systems, where I kind of briefly talked about seasons, about how when you're in a summer season and a harvest season, when things are going great, where things are going good and you're receiving things and everything's positive, to always prepare yourself for the future when things will turn the opposite direction, because winter always comes. And Paul's saying, look, I'm content. Is it spring? Is it summer? Is it fall? Is it winter? It doesn't really matter to me. I'm content in it. Why? How am I content? Because I'm instructed to be both things. I can be rich. I can abound. Or I can suffer need. I can suffer lack. I can deal with that because I know I've learned to be content. Why? Because I know, verse 13, I can do anything because Christ is the one giving me the strength to do it. That's why I can be content. I can be content because I know no matter what happens, Christ is going to strengthen me to accomplish what's in front of me. Anything that comes into my life, when I'm living a life that is following after God, God will give me the power to do it. Whether we're talking about spiritual things, physical things, or whatever. Remember, this whole podcast is about real life. If you listen to podcast number 1, we talked about A.W. Tozer's book, The Pursuit of God, and the sacrament of living, and how he talks about that your secular, physical, worldly, Zoe life is not to be separated from your spiritual life towards God. We have always been, from the beginning, a bridge between physical and the spiritual, and that's how our lives should be lived. And so no matter what we're talking about here, I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. And so the caveat comes in that this is not a copy-paste to put over all my plans, but when I'm living in the will of God, then anything that comes into my life, God has placed there for me to accomplish. Therefore, even if I don't know how to do it yet, I know that there is a solution to that problem and to that thing and to that situation, and God has put it there in my path on purpose for me to do it. Because, and this is the third principle down the way, I understood that God is a father raising children, so he's always teaching us. He's always growing us. He is always maturing us. He never stops. He never stops working on us. Even when we think that he might have forgotten certain things or certain prayer requests or whatever, I even found this out in the past few weeks. Even things that I prayed like 8 years ago that I have not prayed probably since then are being answered today because they were things in God's will, and he's still pruning me and purging me of certain things in my life. Things that he wants me to be able to do in the future I would not be able to do them had he not continued the work these past 8 years. And so that kind of goes into the other podcast where we said how God works through natural means. When he says, I can do all things through Christ, that goes back to verse 11 where he says, I've learned it. Why can I do all things through Christ? Because one, he's strengthening me, but how does he strengthen us? The same way he does, we strengthen anything by putting us through things where we learn. And in my life, the principle first that I learn is that if something comes into my path and I'm doing what I know I'm supposed to do, then no matter how difficult that thing is, I can do it. Even if I've never done it before in my life, even if I've never seen it before, even if I have no clue how it's going to turn out, I know that me doing it will come out to success because it's been put there in my life for God. Meaning that I can succeed. I believe that I can succeed in anything in my life when I know that I am living the way I'm supposed to live. Now you got to think what I'm saying here. When you're walking with God and you're doing what he wants you to do in every other aspect, when situations come into your life, you have to believe that you are able to do that thing, to overcome that thing, to get through that situation, to survive, to succeed, not just survive, but to thrive in it, right? Because I've learned not just to suffer through it, but to be content into it, to be happy about it, to take it on head first, even if I had never seen it before. And let me tell you the story in my life where this kind of actually fleshed out. So maybe you can better understand what I'm trying to say and how it actually worked out in real life. Okay. When I was in Florida, you guys already know, bivocational, working for a contractor. I started as the trash guy, the guy walking around carrying everybody's trash, doing all the stuff no one wants to do, right? New guy always gets to do what no one else wants to do. That's just how it works. And everybody has to shovel the dirt once in a while. That's just how your life works. If you're not willing to do that, you won't be successful. I can just tell you that right now. As a side note. But that's where I started at, right? I'm a trash carrier guy, and I'm working my way up. I'm doing more and more things. And this principle began to be a center point in my life. Because being a cautious person, a scared kid when I was younger, I needed I needed principles in my life that would encourage me, to give me courage to walk on into things I've never done before. Much like Joshua was continually encouraged over and over again in his step into the unknown, where God says, look, I'm going to be with you. Don't fear, don't fret, take strength, be of good courage, and all that other stuff that he tells Joshua to do. And that has also been a big influence in my life, that whole section of scripture, for the same reason. And Joshua's never led the children of Israel before, and it's a huge task. It's a couple million, it's like 1.5 million to 2 million people that he's going to, take on. And so it's a huge thing. He's never done it. He's always been the guy in the back. He's always been number two. He's always relied on, the wisdom of Moses. And yet God is placing within his path, a seemingly impossible task. Yet, through Christ, through God in the Old Testament saying, I'm going to be with you anywhere you go, he would be able to do it even though he had never done it before. And so in my life, as I grew through the ranks and started to take on more and more responsibility, because that's when you get paid more and you do more, you have more responsibility. You're responsible for more things, failures and successes. And as I went through it, I began to do more stuff, and I put this principle into practice, but usually on bigger scales from where I was, but not huge scales. I wasn't like running multiple job sites like I've told you I've done before. The point in life where that pivoted, where those things began, where I moved from just being the normal kind of guy in a truck who shows up and does this job here and gets paid 15, 16 bucks an hour or whatever it is, and doing this kind of thing. The point where it changed for me, where I began to actually do greater and bigger things, and where I ended up, doing multiple jobs in multiple cities and keeping track of all that stuff. How did I get to where I could carry that? Well, it started in the Estuaries condo complex, which is in Butler Beach, I guess, in Florida. And we were doing a Chinese drywall job. If you don't know what Chinese drywall job is, you can look it up later, but it's just a really nasty component. There's a lot of sulfur in the drywall, and it gets released over time, and it corrodes everything in the house. All the electronics start to break, and you just can't live in it. It makes people sick and all this other stuff. So we were subcontracted to a big company out of Florida, the Moss Construction, who built the Marlin Stadium, and they're a huge company. And so we're subbed to them in our area, and they gave us these jobs, and it was 5 condo units and a house. So the house was the next street over, and the condo units were right there, all over the place. There was like 4 buildings, and one was on this floor, one was over here, like the very far end unit at the top, like 5 stories up, and all this other stuff. So they're all over the place. And when we started this, because I had been growing in my abilities, my boss said, hey, I'm going to have you start helping on these bigger jobs. And it's going to be you. It's going to be these 2 other guys. And that's who's going to start it. The day before we were supposed to kick off, or the day of, I can't remember which. It was one of the 2 days. It was either right before or the day of. Those 2 guys were fired for one reason or another. One of them stole money. The other guy stole like pills out of somebody's house. So if you know anything about construction, this is not like abnormal, unfortunately. And so I'm standing there, and I remember to this day where I was standing in the parking lot with my clipboard in my hand, and my boss pulls up with his girlfriend at the time, now his wife, and they just pull up, and he tells me, hey, these guys are canned. Can you do this job by yourself? And my anxiety-ridden brain, biologically speaking, how I naturally am bent, was like, are you nuts? My mind was screaming, absolutely not. But because I had made it a habit of putting this principle into practice, where no matter what it was that came into my life, if I was following God's will, if it was there, then I could do it. And this was the moment where I had to put that to the test. And my mind screamed, no, you don't want to do that big of a job. You don't know if you can do it. All this stuff could go wrong. You might get fired, blah, 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 blah. You've never run a job by yourself ever. I mean, I'd never supervised a job more than maybe one other hand who was helping me. Never have I run subcontractors. Never had I dealt with inspectors. Never had I done any of those things. I had kind of seen other people with them, and I worked with them and all this other stuff, and I'd seen it done, but never myself. And so this opportunity, which was supposed to be shared, is now solely, squarely on my shoulders, and my boss is sitting there in a moment of time. Can you do this? And as I said, my mind was screaming no, but my mouth said yes, absolutely, I'll do it. Like I said many times, my philosophy is simply, let's see what happens. And that's where it came from. Like my mind, my natural person died that day. In many ways, that's 100% true. Who I was, because I had never done something as large as that, with as big as responsibility as that ever in my life. And I just took it on, and I began to learn how to do those things on the fly, on the job. I just had to figure it out. And there wasn't like a whole lot of like things. There was no class. There was nothing. It was just, hey, do this. And I had to figure out how to do it as I went along and did it. And so I found out that no matter what comes into my life, when I am following after Christ and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, even in my regular, everyday, real life job, I was able to do anything that came into my path because I know God had put it there for my benefit, and through Christ, I would find a way to do that. And Christ is really just in strengthening us to become who we were supposed to be in the first place. If you remember, as I think I've talked about this before, the whole point of everything that we are today is to return us to who we were supposed to be in the first place. Jesus Christ was the pinnacle picture of what a man and a physical man should have been in the first place. He is the second Adam. He is the example, the icon of what we ought to be. Right? And so when we talk about living real life or spiritual life, as we said in the first podcast, there should be no difference. And so when Christ is strengthening me, he's not just strengthening me to preach or to do spiritual things or sing songs or whatever. He's filling me with strength to fulfill up to capacity my manhood, I guess, who I am as a man, to become that person who has courage, who has strength, who will take on tasks that he not always, thought. Especially like if you had come to me just a few years before and said, this is what you're going to be doing in a few years, there's no way I could never fathomed it, because I knew who I was. And yet when I finally put into practice the fact that anything that comes into my life, I believe God's put there for me to do, I knew I could do it, even though it scared me, even though it was over the top. Not only am I doing this job, but I'm doing another location, and there's 5 units here. They're all over the place. And let me tell you, it wasn't easy. It was extremely difficult. There were things that we did not realize were going to happen. It was the first job we had ever done for this other company, the first Chinese drywall job I think we'd ever done, or maybe the second. And there are a lot of unknowns, a lot of things that even my boss didn't really know, and things that we weren't really up to speed with. And yet, when it was all said and done, we finished that job on time, exactly as it was supposed to do, with flying colors, according to the foreman or the project manager who was over me from the other company. And so that's just what it is. I was successful in this venture I had never been on ever before in my life, simply because I had lived at the principle that no matter what comes into my life, I can do it. Because Christ is giving me the strength to do that. He's giving me the wisdom to do that. And anyone who thinks that this is not the way this verse should be used, or you think that I'm taking it out of context, or you think that God doesn't actually help us in things like that in the physical world, well, you're an idiot. Because there is nothing we can do physically or spiritually without the help of God. He gives us everything. He gives us our breath, our heartbeat, our mindset, our minds, everything that comes into our life, everything that we've been through has created who we are today. And if we've been following God for enough time, that ought to be a person who is much more able to accomplish things in their life than they ever were before. Because I can do all things because Christ is the one who strengthens me, and he strengthens me through natural means, as we talked about in the past podcasts. And so I just simply believe that I don't know how to do this today, but I'm going to find out, because God has put this in my path to grow me. And the reason I'm saying this crosses over is because those events in my physical, carnal work life, whatever you want to call it, if you want to keep compartmentalizing it like that, those things bled into who I am today. All of my leadership skills, which I don't get to use a whole lot at the moment, but when I was able to use them, and all the things that I have learned and all of the abilities I have today, almost all of them stem from this one instance in time where fear and anxiety said no, but my mouth just said yes based on a principle from God's word that I knew no matter how difficult the situation is, I could do it because God had put it there for my benefit and for me to accomplish. Because men were made to accomplish things. When God created Adam, he made him to work and to do and to subdue, it says, the earth. We were given purpose and strength. Like everything that we are as men, I don't want to talk about men right now, but everything we are as men is to do and to accomplish and to go out there. That's why I think we love to explore and to find new things, because it's in us. God sent people out, and he says, replenish the earth, not just right here. It's like, the whole reason the Tower of Babel was what it was because they all tried to gather in one place. And God said, I don't want them all in one place. I want you to go out. I want you to go into the world. I want you to conquer, to subdue the world. And those things are part of our spiritual life as much as they are physical life. And if I'm doing things through Christ, it's not just the spiritual realm and over-spiritualized realm of things, but it's also in my work life, in things like this that most people would not connect it to, but it is. Anyways, I hope that made sense. I might have gone all over the place, but the fact is that when you are living a life that is according to God's word, and you're pleasing to Him, and you're following after Him, all situations that come into your life, you have the ability to do it, or you're going to gain it when you step into it. And it's really always, I guess, you're gaining it as you go, but it's there to do. If it's in front of you, don't run away from it. Don't be afraid of it. If you know it's come into your life and it's right to do, then do it and see what happens. See how much you grow when you stop running away from bigger responsibilities and just start jumping in head first and doing them. Because what I've learned from just doing stuff, believing that no matter if I didn't know how to do it yet, I would get it as I did it, I also learned a secondary principle that all problems have a solution. That was a huge part of what I had to learn as a project manager. No matter how big the problem was, no matter if someone had run over like a pipeline and there was like a gusher of water coming out of the ground, or someone had cut a line, or someone had done something just so stupid, and usually you will like freeze in fear, like, man, how am I going to deal with this? How am I going to explain this? How is this going to work out right? But I learned not to allow anxiety and fear to overwhelm you in situations where someone broke a leg, or someone's hurt, or something's happened, or something caved in. You simply look at it and say, all right, this is where we're at, and I know there's a solution to it. The problem's big. I don't know it yet, but I know I will find a solution to it because I've done it so many times. And that's why I say, again, that the strength of Christ, the strength of God comes through natural means, through experience. As you experience things, you grow and you become more and more and more. And that's why you can do all things. Not because Christ just in the moment strengthened him, but because of verse 11 says, I've learned it. I've learned it. When you put things together, you learn that we are always growing. And when it says I can do all things through Christ, it doesn't mean immediately right now. It doesn't always mean that you're going to do everything perfect or be successful in everything you do. But the majority, the sum total of your life will be a success because you're simply taking what God hands you and you're doing what you can where you are at the time with it. I might have rambled a little bit on that one. But that has been the For Real Life and Godliness podcast for today. I am your host, as always, Pastor Will. And if you're on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. If you would, share it with somebody that you think it might help. If it helped you, it might help them. If you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, save this to your playlist, rate us, leave us a 5-star rating. Don't leave us anything less than that. If it's less than that, just let me know personally and I'll fix it. And we'll see you next time on the For Real Life Godliness podcast.